Tonight, breaking news as we come on the 5G showdown just one day before a nationwide launch. Verizon and AT&T delaying the service near dozens of U.S. airports. The 11th hour decision coming after the country's major airlines warned of catastrophic flight disruptions, saying 5G may interfere with aircraft technology. But the cell carriers adamant there is no risk, pointing to other countries that already use 5G. Tonight, live, you'll hear from guests on both sides of this issue. Ready to invade? Russia moving troops to Belarus's border with Ukraine, in addition to nearly 100,000 soldiers along its own western border. The White House warning Putin could launch an attack into Ukraine at any moment. The U.S. Secretary of State now on his way to the region to call for a de-escalation. On Top Story tonight, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Tonga under ash, the first images showing the devastation on the island nation after that historic volcanic eruption and tsunami. Aid unable to reach survivors. Tonight, Tonga's famous flag bearer and multi-Olympian joins Top Story Live, the search for his own family members and what his home needs most from the rest of the world. Deadly explosion, the new video just in, showing New York City police running into a burning apartment building that had just partially collapsed the moment they rescue a woman who was trapped under debris. Peloton problems, the company riding into success during the pandemic, but sales are sinking as Americans return to in-person workouts. The recordings obtained by CNBC showing the company may be moving towards massive cuts. And real estate alert, is that red-hot housing market starting to cool down? What potential home buyers and sellers need to know. Top Story starts right now. And good evening. We begin Top Story tonight with the showdown between airlines and wireless carriers over 5G. Just hours before a nationwide rollout of the service, Verizon and AT&T saying they will delay turning on 5G cell towers near dozens of airports around the country. The last-minute move after the country's major airlines warned the service could interfere with flight technology and said it would cause mass delays nationwide. The new reporting tonight, some international airlines even canceling flights to the U.S. tomorrow. But cell companies say there is no risk and that the technology is being used in nearly 40 other countries with no impact to air travel. Industry experts on both sides of this debate are joining Top Story Live tonight to discuss this delay. I'll speak to them in just a few minutes, but we want to start with NBC's aviation correspondent Tom Costello.
With the clock ticking down to the nationwide 5G rollout at midnight, today a last-minute deal to avoid an airline crisis. AT&T and Verizon both say they will temporarily limit or delay turning on 5G cell towers that are close to certain airports. The announcement comes after 10 airline CEOs urged the White House to intervene, warning of catastrophic disruptions affecting hundreds of thousands of airline passengers if a 2-mile buffer zone isn't created around airport 5G sites. President Biden today applauded the agreement coming after years of political infighting involving the FCC, FAA, the airlines, the Trump and Biden administrations, and competing agendas. The concern, the new 5th generation of cell service called 5G operates on a radio spectrum that could bleed over and interfere with a plane's radar altimeter. Those altimeters bounce a signal off the ground to give pilots their precise distance to the ground.
50, 40, 30.
Critical for landing and poor visibility. Warning of potential interference, the FAA had told pilots they would not be able to use altimeters at more than 80 airports near 5G sites, including large airport hubs in Houston, Dallas, L.A., New York, Chicago, and Seattle. The airlines warned that would lead to massive delays, diversions, and cancellations as soon as Wednesday.
The FAA has to go airport by airport, runway by runway, and do an analysis to clear these runways at airports so that we can safely fly.
But the cell phone industry, which already delayed the rollout twice, insists 5G is safe. AT&T today took aim at the FAA, saying, "We are frustrated by the FAA's inability to do what nearly 40 countries have done, which is to safely deploy 5G technology without disrupting aviation services."
The bottom line is we've got to get this done safely. And right now, every indication is it's not been tested and it is not safe for a full rollout.
Tom joins us now. And Tom, I know you have some new reporting tonight. Some carriers are already canceling flights.
Well, these were international carriers inbound, among them Emirates Air out of the United Arab Emirates, canceling because they were concerned that if, in fact, the FAA's rule went into effect at midnight, they may not be able to land at airports with their altimeters. Now we know that the FAA is likely to lift that order since they are going to keep these 5G sites turned off around airports. But if you are expecting somebody coming in from an overseas flight, they may be on a later flight. They may be delayed.
So we're already seeing this as a real problem. What's the next step here, Tom? Do the airlines need to update the technology on the altimeters to recalibrate them, or do the cell companies need to find a workaround?
Well, at this very moment, the FAA says 45% of the U.S. aviation fleet could, in theory, be able to land at an airport with their altimeters. But that still means, you know, you've got 55% that can't. And among them, wide-body planes, a 777, a 787, for example. And so the question is, can they come up with a workaround for those planes? Do they have to rework the altimeter? Or might the cell companies have to keep the volume turned down, the power turned down, if and when they do turn on those 5G sites around airports? This is still undecided and uncharted territory. But a lot of money's at stake, and the question is, how long will it take? We don't know right now.
Yeah, and we're going to learn a lot in the next few days. Okay, Tom Costello on that breaking news. With AT&T and Verizon limiting 5G around airports to prevent what the airlines are calling a catastrophic disruption to service, we want to dig a little deeper into this battle. Joining Top Story Live now is Jonathan Adelstein. He's the CEO and president of the Wireless Infrastructure Association. And Kathleen Bangs is a former commercial pilot and aerospace journalist. I want to thank you both for joining Top Story tonight. So, Kathleen, let's start with you. How real is this of a problem? And as a former pilot, what safety concerns do you have?
Well, that's the whole thing, is that I think we all know it's a little absurd that it's gotten to this point, especially since we see operations going on in Europe and in other countries. But there is some change, some differences, because supposedly they operate in a different spectrum than our 5G rollout will operate in. And will this have an impact? Will it interfere on the radar altimeter? When I speak to the pilot unions, what they're saying is they have a real concern, and they're in alignment on this. Each union, SWAPA, Allied Pilots from American, ALPA, they're in alignment, and they're in alignment with the air carriers, cargo and passengers. So I think it's a real issue, because what they're asking for is, look, just give us some time so that we can make sure, okay? We don't want to make our passengers the test subjects.
Jonathan, that, we heard Tom Costello's reporting there. We just heard Kathleen. AT&T and Verizon both announcing they're temporarily delaying this technology near airports, but they're basically telling the airlines that they've had enough time to prepare for 5G. The pilots are saying they still need more time. What's going on here?
I agree with Kathleen that this is absurd. They have had 2 years since the FCC, the expert agency, by the way, I used to serve on it, said that this is completely safe for aviation. The aviation industry has had a chance to change altimeters if they felt they needed to, because they're not operating properly. It's not because our devices aren't operating properly. Essentially, they have been operating in other countries. We've been flying U.S. aircraft with FAA approval in other countries. And one thing I disagree with Kathleen on is that, in fact, they're operating on the same frequencies that we are, and they're even closer. 3 times closer in some cases to the frequencies that are being used here in the United States. So why is the FAA allowing our planes to fly in other countries with a lot more potential for interference that haven't taken the same steps that we have voluntarily, by the way? U.S. aviation should be at risk overseas, but for some reason they're applying that here in the United States while letting U.S. flights travel abroad. And U.S. airlines are flying right into them. They're not canceling flights into airports in Europe. We've taken the strongest standards in Europe, in France, and applied them here around airports temporarily in order to accommodate these concerns. I think we've gone above and beyond the call of duty. I think it would actually be safe under the original scheme, but we've done this in order to accommodate the concerns that have been raised and give the FAA time to figure this out. But they should have figured this out long ago. This is way overdue.
Kathleen, on that point, though, I have to ask you, why would pilots and the airlines make this up if this wasn't really a potentially dangerous problem?
Well, you bring up a good question. And I think is what they want to see is they just want to see more definitive proof that there won't be interference with the radar altimeter. That's such a critical instrument when you're landing in low visibility, when you're making what's called a Category 2, a Category 3 approach, sometimes down to visibility just in the hundreds of feet. Sometimes, it's on the auto land at this point. So that's not the only function, though, that the radar altimeter does. So could they possibly come up with a filter for this? Sure, there's different things, there's different workarounds they can do, but the radar altimeter works in conjunction with so many other systems on the airplane. They just don't need this additional headache. What we need is pilots to be absolutely certain, like they were with the Boeing, MAX jet. When they went back to work, they were satisfied. Okay, the MCAS issue has been rectified. We now have training. We feel safe. They want to make sure that they actually know that there's not going to be bleed over interference from that part of the C-band spectrum into that narrow band where the radar altimeter gets its signal also.
Jonathan, is there a lack of leadership here, though? I do want to ask you this. Is there a lack of leadership here because no one has essentially made a call on this, whether it be the president or the Secretary of Transportation, to essentially say, listen, this is safe. We've looked into it. Either we're going to go with 5G near the airports or, hey, it's too dangerous. We need you guys to slow down.
Look, the FCC has made the determination, and that's the federal government's expert agency. The Federal Communications Commission has said that these systems can operate in exactly where they are without causing any harmful interference. And there's been no evidence to the contrary, none. There's one flawed study that's been used over and over again, but there's no proof of fact. We have real world evidence that we have used of what's happening in Europe. I mean, if US pilots are so concerned, why are they flying into these countries that have systems operating for 5G that are even closer to the altimeters than what we have proposed here in the United States? I mean, there is certainly a concern about other agencies that aren't experts in how these things work, like the FAA, second guessing what the FCC is doing. And we appreciate all the efforts that are being taken to try to coordinate the two agencies, but there has to be a unified response. And we have to let the expert agency, the FCC, make the final call. They did that 2 years ago. And since that time, there's been no action by anybody until about a month ago when suddenly the airline industry threw a fit and went to the FAA and said, oh my goodness, what's going on here? How are we letting this happen when they've had 2 years to deal with this?
Well, I'm sure the FAA would have something to say about that too. They wouldn't ultimately want the FCC to make the call. But you guys have informed our viewers a lot about this. We've covered a lot of ground. We want to thank you both, Jonathan Adelstein and, of course, Kathleen Banks. We appreciate your time here on Top Story. We want to move on now to the White House. As President Biden rounds out his first year in office, the administration is looking for new ways to communicate his message amid a sinking approval rating and multiple blows to his agenda. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell has more.
Great to be on the cusp of year 2, after failing to convince his own party to pass key parts of his agenda. With poll numbers down, President Biden is ready for his own White House reset.
There's a lot of talk about disappointments and things we haven't gotten done.
NBC News has learned one shift in strategy will tone down the legislator-in-chief persona built on President Biden's 36 years in the Senate. That means less public focus on his role in deal-making negotiations.
I'm just not going to get into private discussions or conversations with any members of the Senate from here. I know that's maybe a change.
Instead, the goal is to find ways for the president to engage more personally with the American people.
So, let me speak to you directly.
Advisors would like to highlight strengths they see, like empathy, but have not decided how best to achieve that. Tonight, the president is braced for another setback as the Senate debates Democrats' voting rights legislation.
No one denies the path ahead is an uphill struggle.
Democrats argue they are defending democracy against restrictive state election measures they say would suppress the vote. But there is no path, as 2 Democrats refuse to back rules changes that would allow Democrats to act alone. Republicans call it a power grab.
Senate Democrats want to mar their own legacies with a reckless procedural vote they know will fail.
All right, Kelly joins us now from the White House. Kelly, when we look back at the last year, it has been a tough one for the president, especially on COVID. We're talking about testing problems, Afghanistan, now Ukraine, the Build Back Better in peril, voting rights the same, both moderates and progressives unhappy. Do you think there will be more than just a reset? Will there be maybe even a staff reset as well?
Well, there have been a lot of challenges, and for many of the people around the president, they've been with him a long time through the campaign. Some served with him when he was vice president. So there are some long relationships there, and it's not unusual to see a reset among staff in year 2 in a White House. But we don't have specific reporting of major players ready to leave just yet. But that would not be surprising. But looking at ways to change up some of the messaging and some of the focus is what our reporting tells us, and something we'll be looking for specific evidence to follow in the days ahead. Tom?
And Kelly, while I have you here, to be fair, what accomplishments is the administration pointing to, and any near-term goals they think they can achieve?
Well, with the 1-year mark, they do have their own list. They're pointing to the higher number of people who are actually working, with higher jobs in terms of the unemployment number being down, wages going up. They're pointing to that as a strength within the economy. They know inflation is a problem and there are other issues. They're also saying that they believe they can do a lot more when it comes to, if you look at vaccinations and a year ago where the vaccination rate is and how much they've accomplished on that. They also believe, with tomorrow unveiling their program to send tests, at-home tests to Americans, they believe that will go smoothly. So far, it's already working well in what they call beta testing, where people can actually already sign up and get those free tests. So they're pointing to some of the things where they believe their programs and ideas have worked, and they have their own list of accomplishments that we expect to hear the president touting at a press conference tomorrow as well. Tom?
All right, Kelly O'Donnell from the White House tonight. Kelly, thank you. We head overseas to Tonga, where we've been following the growing crisis in the wake of a massive volcanic eruption and tsunami. The new aerial images revealing the massive scope of the devastation. Entire islands wiped out, many left without clean drinking water, planes carrying aid unable to land on runways, still covered in volcanic ash. And the fear tonight that the death toll could be growing. Here's NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley.
Tonight, the first images taken in the skies over Tonga revealing vast devastation after a volcanic eruption triggered a massive tsunami, leaving at least 3 dead. But the fear is that number will grow higher once rescue crews can reach the ravaged areas. This once bustling port, now buried in ash and dust. A lush green neighborhood, now just a sea of gray. The island that surrounded the underwater volcano before its eruption, now seemingly gone. The images captured from planes sent by New Zealand and Australia, providing a glimpse of the desperate need on the ground. The ash that now covers the islands creating a dual crisis, contaminating the water supply, leaving thousands with nothing to drink, and blanketing the airport's runways, making it impossible for planes carrying humanitarian aid to land.
60% of the runway has been cleared, and this is done manually. I hear up to 200 volunteers are sweeping the runway in preparation for the supplies to land on Thursday or Friday.
New Zealand's Navy now sending bottled water and other essentials by boat, but those supplies will take days to reach Tonga. The massive eruption over the weekend reportedly causing a tsunami with waves more than 50 feet high. The Tongan government says it began rescue efforts on Sunday, finding some outer islands completely destroyed by its impact. The tight-knit island community already beginning to grieve together.
When somebody else loses a parent, we all feel it. And the same if I was to have any suffering, I'm aware that other islanders, other Pacific people, other Tongans all feel exactly my feeling. That's how close we are.
The full impact of the catastrophic natural disaster still largely unknown. With phone lines and internet access down, Tonga's leader today with a glimmer of hope, saying cell and internet service could be back up soon.
Within the next 24 to 48 hours, they may be able to restore some level of service. And what that means for Tongans in Tonga and our diaspora overseas is that we'll be able to be in touch with our loved ones.
But for Tongans around the world, that wait is excruciating as the need for help grows more apparent by the day. Matt Bradley, NBC News.
Our thanks to Matt for that update. Staying on the devastation in Tonga now, many of the family members of people on the island are still unable to communicate with their loved ones due to the internet and power lines being down, like Matt mentioned there in his piece. Joining Top Story now is Tongan Olympian Peter Tafatufa. He's one of those many people who has had trouble communicating with his loved ones, including his own dad. Peter, thank you so much for joining Top Story tonight. First, I have to ask you, have you heard from your father or anyone else on the island?
Firstly, thank you for having me. I haven't heard from my father as of this morning. I've only just heard 10, 15 minutes ago that my family in one of the islands of Hawaii, it was that the house that our family in is okay. The water went right through, but there was no loss of life or injury there. But my father's on a different island, and I haven't heard anything yet.
Peter, you were raised in Tonga. What's it like to see the devastating images we've been seeing over the last few days? I mean, some of the video is even hard to watch. It's got to just kill you inside to see this.
It's very difficult to watch this kind of thing, and it's one of the reasons that we're trying to reach out to the world is that there's a whole country in the Pacific which is covered in ash from a volcanic eruption, and then a tsunami hits. It's very hard for us. There's not much we can do from outside other than to bring awareness to try and raise funds to help when the time comes. But yeah, very difficult to watch.
Is there anything people in America can do right now to help Tonga?
Yes, absolutely. So we started a GoFundMe fundraiser account, and we're raising funds for disaster relief. At the moment, the communications are completely out. But as soon as those lines go back up, hopefully in the next 24 to 48 hours, then we'll be able to start sending aid to the country. At the moment, no aid has been able to get in. Australia has started, they've sent a naval ship, but no flights can actually land there just yet because of the ash on the runway.
Do you know what the greatest need is right now as far as aid's concerned?
It seems that the greatest need is going to be drinking water. It's going to be if there are people out there who can help with desalination, with filtration for water, there's going to be also respiratory challenges, so our hospitals may need help as well. There's a thick layer of ash on the whole country, and people are going to be breathing in this ash, and drinking water is all from rainwater, which falls off roofs and into rainwater tanks. So any help from around the world is much needed.
Peter, you never know how information is going to reach your loved ones. If you have a message tonight for your father, if there's any chance he sees this somehow when he's able to get some type of internet connection, what is your message to your dad tonight?
First and foremost, I want to reach out to my father, but also to all the Tongans in Tonga who are going through a difficult time. I just want all of you to know that we are here. We're waiting. We're ready. We've got as much help as we can coming, and that we were standing by you guys. We were standing with you when the ash was falling, when the seas were coming over the land. We were standing here ready to help.
Peter Tawhatafua, we can hear the passion in your voice, and we hope that your loved ones, especially your father, are okay, and we hope Americans help out with that aid. We thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to head now to the escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine. The White House today warning that a, quote, extremely dangerous situation is building with Russia amassing more than 100,000 troops along the Ukrainian border. This comes as the Secretary of State travels to Ukraine to meet with their president. Richard Engel reports.
While Russia denies it wants war, it does want the world to know it has its sights set on Ukraine. New videos show Russian troops preparing for battle near the Ukrainian border as fresh columns of Russian tanks arrive in neighboring Belarus, which has said it will follow Russia's lead whatever happens. Russia has positioned about 100,000 troops that could invade Ukraine from the north, east, and south. A bipartisan delegation of American senators visited Kiev yesterday with a message for Vladimir Putin, who insists it's Russia that's threatened by decades of NATO expansion.
Our message is there will be consequences if he chooses to violate the sanctity of this democracy.
Diplomacy is in high gear. Before Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Kiev tomorrow, the head of NATO warning war is a real possibility.
The risk of a conflict is real. NATO allies call on Russia to de-escalate, and any further aggression will come with a high cost for Moscow.
Secretary Blinken is due to meet Ukraine's president tomorrow and Russia's foreign minister on Friday. Russia denies reports that it has already begun to thin out its embassy here, which could be an ominous sign or just more messaging from President Putin. Tom?
Richard Engel in Ukraine tonight for us. Richard, we thank you. For more on these escalating tensions, we want to bring in now retired U.S. Navy Admiral James Stavridis, and former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO. Admiral Stavridis, thank you for joining Top Story tonight. It feels like the temperature is getting hotter. We have our Secretary of State flying to Europe to prevent an invasion. Are we at a point now where it's not if, but when Russia will invade?
I don't think we're quite there, Tom, but certainly if there were a checklist of things you do before you invade, Vladimir Putin is working down that pretty relentlessly. Bring troops around the border, check. Increase cyber attacks, check. Make outrageous claims against your opponents so that if they don't meet them, you can invade, check. And most recently, take people out of your embassy in preparation for war. It's pretty ominous right now. I would call it a 50-60% chance that there'll be some level of Russian incursion across this border. And we ought to just hit pause and remember, Tom, he's done this before. He did it in 2008, invaded Georgia. He did it 2014, invaded Ukraine. Neither history nor current events are on our side here. It looks like he may go.
Admiral, this issue specifically can be very confusing because there are so many players and so much geopolitics at play. If you can walk our viewers through exactly what Russia wants and why the U.S. and NATO won't or can't meet all those demands.
Ukraine is not a NATO ally. Important to know there are 30 NATO allies, 28 of whom are in Europe. So Ukraine desperately wants to join NATO. And so NATO has been giving them a long ramp to join. There are a lot of complications there. In a nutshell, what this confrontation is about is that Vladimir Putin wants a veto. He wants to be able to say to NATO, oh, no, you may never bring Ukraine into NATO. That's untenable. It is unacceptable. NATO's an open alliance for democracies. We're not going to give Vladimir Putin that kind of leverage. What we can do is talk to him about troop movements, missile defense systems. There are plenty of diplomatic things we could have a conversation about, but we are not going to say, Vladimir Putin, you get to say who's in NATO and who isn't. That's untenable.
Finally, Admiral, briefly, what Vladimir Putin wants is not new. He wanted this during the Trump administration. My question is, why now? What has changed for the Russians besides a new American president? Do they think America has taken its eye off the ball in respect to COVID or a sharper focus on China?
Tom, you've got it right. They look across the Atlantic and see us very distracted with our internal divisions, with COVID. They see opportunity. It's often said that crime is where motive meets opportunity. Putin wants Ukraine. He sees an opportunity. It's a dangerous moment.
Admiral Stavridis, we thank you for your time and your analysis here on Top Story. Still ahead tonight, ivermectin lawsuit. The Arkansas inmates prescribed the horse dewormer to treat COVID-19 while in jail, and they say a doctor lied about what they were taking. Plus, the new body cams as officers responded to a deadly explosion in New York City, the moment they raced into the building to save trapped residents. And Peloton problems? The company potentially preparing for price hikes and massive layoffs as more Americans ditch their at-home workouts and head to the gym. Stay with us. Top Story just getting started on this Tuesday night. Back now with a closer look at Peloton. The company, once a Wall Street darling, is now facing sagging sales and pressure to cut costs. This is the latest in a long series of setbacks for Peloton. Our Priscilla Thompson traces the company's uphill battle.
Peloton, one of the fastest selling items at the start of the pandemic, is now facing a new reality as people around the globe return to normal workout routines.
Peloton sales, they are surging as people look to work out at home, while gyms, as we all know, are closed, and that is sending the stock a lot higher.
But not anymore. The exercise brand stock hit a 52-week low this week, closing Tuesday around $30 a share. This after the stock tumbled 76% last year. CNBC reporting the stationary bike maker is now bringing in consulting company McKinsey & Co. to help cut costs. The hard times not surprising to some users who got in early.
There was kind of a boom for the Peloton right during the pandemic. So I think it was only a matter of time before things started to kind of settle downwards a little bit.
In recordings of a company call obtained by CNBC, Peloton's management team can be heard considering cutting its apparel division, asking store employees to take customer service calls, and potentially closing up to 15 of its more than 120 showrooms around the world. Neither Peloton nor McKinsey responded to NBC's request for comment. Peloton now saying it likely won't see actual profits until 2023.
What is going on with Peloton right now?
There aren't that many people now that are creating home gyms anymore. Right now, you have the option to go to a variety of different boutique fitness places, as well as just your traditional gym that was down the street that used to be closed.
The roller coaster 2 years started after the company IPO'd towards the end of 2019. The stock plunged after a controversial holiday ad went viral.
It's the infamous ad that got everyone all spun up. A husband gives his already thin wife a Peloton exercise bike as a gift.
But it was nothing like what would come. Peloton saw a surge in popularity at the height of the pandemic, more than quadrupling its sales in the past 2 years. The stock reaching an all-time high of more than $160 a share in January of last year. Then came the setbacks.
Now the company is announcing a voluntary recall of its Tread and Tread Plus treadmills.
The company was forced to recall treadmills in May after one child died and dozens more were injured from being pulled under the treadmills. Stocks took another plunge in December when Mr. Big, a main character in the Sex and the City reboot, had a fatal heart attack after a Peloton ride on the show.
John!
Peloton was quick to clap back with an ad showing Christopher Noth alive and well.
And just like that, the world was reminded that regular cycling stimulates and improves your heart, lungs, and circulation.
The commercial went viral, but it backfired. The ad was pulled less than a week later amid sexual assault allegations made against Noth, which he denies. Now, new signs of trouble for the company that saw its lowest subscriber gains in roughly 2 years last summer.
Starting at the end of the month, the company's going to make you pay $250 for delivery and setup for its bike and an extra $350 for its treadmill.
The company blaming inflation and higher supply chain costs for the price hike. Current subscribers say they'll also be on the lookout for changes.
Getting rid of any beloved instructors altogether, I think, would definitely not make people happy.
All right, Priscilla Thompson joins us now in studio. So, Priscilla, Peloton's still very, very popular. You mentioned those price hikes. What can customers expect?
Well, Tom, we're talking about hundreds of dollars in delivery fees and setup fees that customers are now going to be expected to pay. So that bike is going to increase by around $250 and the treadmill up $350. Both of those changes expected to take effect by the end of the month.
All right, getting more and more expensive to stay healthy. Okay, Priscilla, thank you so much for that. When we come back, a real estate alert tonight. The housing market may be cooling down, and it won't only affect buyers and sellers, but renters too. What you need to know. And Space Diamond, the massive gem going up for auction, why experts believe it's not from this planet. Stay with us. Back now with Top Stories newsfeed, and we begin with a deadly building explosion in New York City. New body cam footage just in shows NYPD officers running towards the burning building in the Bronx just moments after the blast. Part of that building partially collapsing, the officers rushing into an apartment covered in debris, pulling a woman out from under a couch. At least one person was killed and several others injured. The cause of the explosion is under investigation. 4 inmates in Northwest Arkansas say they were unknowingly prescribed ivermectin to treat COVID-19. The ACLU has filed a lawsuit against Washington County Jail and its doctor on behalf of the detainees. In August, the county sheriff said the horse dewormer had been prescribed to inmates who had the virus despite repeated warnings from health officials. The inmates alleged they were told they were being given vitamins, steroids, and antibiotics. And a U.S. Senate candidate from Louisiana going viral today after smoking marijuana in his latest campaign ad.
Every 37 seconds, someone is arrested for possession of marijuana.
Democrat Gary Chambers using the video to share stats about current marijuana laws and the racial disparity among those arrested for marijuana-related crimes. The social justice advocate and community organizer from Baton Rouge is looking to unseat Republican John Neely Kennedy this year. As Omicron spreads from state to state, more hospitals warn of staffing shortages. One hospital in Texas is ahead of the problem. How their new technology is changing the game and saving lives. Ellison Barber reports.
I saw this alarm coming on the ventilator on a higher settings. What's going on?
At Houston Methodist Hospital, the future is now.
ICU was related to sedation, but thank you for alerting us.
Doctors and nurses in this command center keeping watch over hundreds of ICU patients, many suffering from COVID-19. This is the virtual ICU, where they monitor 15 real-life ICUs across 8 hospitals.
We could not have delivered care in the last 2 years to the number of ICU patients, emergency room patients, and intermediate care patients if we did not have our virtual ICU. Black and white, simple as that.
Watch how this works. Imagine I'm a nurse and I notice one of my patients, a COVID patient, their oxygen level has started to drop. I can alert the doctors and nurses working on the ICU floor. I can also look inside the room as a nurse is outside the door putting on their PPE to safely go inside. I can zoom in and look at the oxygen flow and maybe start working on ideas to help this patient a little faster.
It is the integration of human and technology to deliver care in the most sickest of all patients, which is the intensive care units.
It sounds a little bit like science fiction.
But the VICU may be just the beginning. New breakthroughs in medical technology could be coming to a hospital near you sooner than you think.
We're looking at something that's changing in real time, and we will start to see this adopted more and more in the coming months and years.
Remote-controlled ventilators operated by doctors hundreds of miles away are just around the corner, according to Dr. Julian Goldman, an expert in medical technology.
I mean, a great example is looking at an autopilot system in an airplane. You still have the pilot, but the pilot is being assisted by the autopilot that's keeping the plane on track.
The VICU now a critical part of the team here.
Can you imagine we provide world-class care to the patient, we prevented them deterioration, and we were able to save an ICU bed. Voila.
And Tom, with staffing shortages across the country, this technology has been a literal lifesaver. At this hospital alone, they've had 37% fewer codes in the last year because, they say, of this technology. Tom.
All right, a program that looks like it's working. Ellison, we thank you for that. We want to turn now to Money Talks, what consumers and investors need to know from the business world and beyond. 2021 was a record year for the housing market, with median housing pricing rising about 16%. But a new analysis from the Wall Street Journal suggests that red-hot market could be cooling off in 2022. Dion Rabowen joins us now. He's a reporter and host of Wall Street Journal Markets on YouTube. Dion, I saw your story this morning on the Wall Street Journal app, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Walk our viewers through what the signs are that you're seeing that this housing market could be cooling off.
Yeah, I read through a number of different real estate outlooks from some of the big names. You got the Mortgage Bankers Association, Redfin, the National Association of Realtors, NAR, and when you look through them, there's a consistent theme, and that's the expectation for prices to rise, but for that rise to slow down considerably from what we've seen over the last 2 years. Now, you talked about last year, 2021's 16% increase in housing prices. That followed 2020's 11% increase in housing prices. This year, those experts only see prices rising 2 to 5%, depending on which outlook you read. And that's because of 3 big reasons. Number one is the expectation for increased housing supply, as in more houses being built and more people listing their house on the market. Number 2, the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. Now, those interest rates translate pretty much directly into the mortgage rate. Higher mortgage rates mean higher monthly home costs. That housing note that you're paying every single month is probably going to go up. And number 3, record inflation. We saw the highest inflation in the past 40 years in 2021. That's expected to slow down. Average economists saying that they predict it's going to be somewhere around 3 to 5%, significantly slower than that 7% number we saw for December. So those are the 3 big reasons that we're expecting to see housing prices slow down in 2022.
Starting to hear about those stories about prices of lumber going up again. What should prospective buyers and sellers be on the lookout for this year?
Well, the number one thing you want to be on the lookout for is this increased supply. Whereas last year, home buyers had a record low shortage of homes to look out for. Now you're going to see more homes being built, as in more new construction, so more new houses on the market, as well as, like I said, more people listing their houses. So, whereas in 2021, you were looking at maybe 3, 4, 5 houses if you were an average home buyer, right? You had your budget, you had the area you wanted to live in. People are now expanding that. They're saying, okay, well, with work from home, I can go live in different places. And people are building homes now where they weren't previously. And so there's a lot more options expected this year. And that should help take some of the pressure that's been driving home prices kind of through the roof over the past couple of years down.
The Wall Street Journal's Dion Rabone. We love having you on Top Story. We'll hope to have you on again. Thanks for joining us tonight. Now to Top Story's Global Watch. The suspect who held 4 people hostage at a Texas synagogue was known to British authorities. 44-year-old Malik Faisal Akram had been on the British Security Service's watch list as a subject of interest in 2020 and was investigated later that year. He was said to no longer be a risk in 2021, which is why he was able to fly to the U.S. And a massive black diamond believed to be from outer space is going up for auction. The 555-carat rare gem is expected to fetch nearly $7 million at an auction in Dubai known as the Enigma. It contains elements only found in outer space. Experts say it could have been created from a meteor or an asteroid strike on Earth. It could also be up to 4 billion years old. Pretty cool. All right, coming up, the journalist targeted. A photojournalist fatally shot outside of his home in Mexico, and advocates say it's part of an alarming trend. How the government is responding tonight. Back now with the Americas, where we take a look at stories coming out of the U.S. and across Latin America. In Mexico, new details are coming in after a photojournalist was killed as he left his home in Tijuana. His death is just coming days after another journalist was killed in the state of Veracruz. These two are just the latest casualties in a country that is being called the deadliest place for journalists, especially those that cover the cartels. NBC's Zincle Esamwa has more.
Today, a journalist murdered in Tijuana, one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico. Margarito Martinez Esquivel, a crime reporter and photographer, shot dead outside his home on Monday.
Margarito was a person with a good heart. He was not a malicious person. He was always very collaborative with others, and obviously this hurts a lot.
The murder is under investigation and has not been linked to his profession. Still, the gruesome incident has journalists and human rights activists on alert. This is the second death of a journalist in Mexico less than 1 month into the new year. Journalist Jose Luis Gamboa fatally stabbed last week, known for his critique of authorities. The Committee to Protect Journalists declared Mexico the deadliest country for journalists outside of war zones, with at least 145 journalists killed between 2000 and 2021.
Why is the death rate so high for journalists in Mexico?
The most important factor is impunity. More than 90% of all crimes in Mexico against journalists and against human rights defenders never actually reach a verdict in a court of law. And this is all happening in a context of extreme violence perpetrated by very powerful organized crime groups all over the country, often working together with corrupt authorities.
Martinez Esquivel was well known for covering crime in Mexico.
He worked for several formal media outlets. He was a provider of all this information that is generated daily, and it is a great loss because he was someone who had requested the protection mechanism for journalists about a month ago, and today he is dead.
This marks the 25th murder since Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador took office. But the president this morning placing doubt on whether the attack had anything to do with Martinez Esquivel's profession.
If we analyze case by case, there is no relationship.
What does justice look like?
Well, justice is very tenuous in Mexico. We want the authorities, both state and federal authorities, to properly investigate these killings. They need to make the streets safer so that journalists aren't as exposed to criminal gangs as they are right now. It's also extremely important that the Mexican government of President López Obrador starts taking journalism seriously. He needs to find a way to coexist with journalism in Mexico in this very difficult and violent context.
All right, Zinkley joins us now from 30 Rock, and we can't stress enough how brave the journalists in Mexico are, especially the ones that cover crime and the cartels, because things like this happen all the time across that country. So, Zinkley, I have to ask you, what more is the government doing to protect journalists there who clearly are being targeted in some cases?
Yeah, Tom, that's an important question. And the Committee to Protect Journalists is emphasizing that the government is not doing enough. They want them to take action on these ongoing threats to journalism, particularly since so many of these murders have happened during the current administration's tenure. And they tell me it's not just the murders, but also the outstanding number of missing journalists in Mexico as well. And of course, Tom, these are more than numbers, right? You said it yourself. They are people. And in response to Monday's killing, there's been an outpouring of support online. We heard from a Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer, Michael Robinson Chavez, calling him in part brave and tenacious. And so journalists and human rights activists around the world are really hoping for change and justice, Tom.
All right, Zinkley, we appreciate that story. Thank you. When we come back, refugees helping refugees. A Seattle organization is helping families from Afghanistan adjust to their new lives in the U.S., and the volunteers have a special connection to the cause. Stay with us. Finally tonight, we want to highlight a small group of volunteers making a huge difference. NBC's Vicki Nguyen has more on this organization and her own personal connection to the story.
Nguyen Nguyen and Ali Nguyen are paying a visit to Afghan refugees, Sahib Mashwani and his family of 8.
They make lentils and garbanzo beans.
They're delivering donated food. Sahib, his wife, and their 6 children have only been in Seattle for a few days, finally settling down after spending their first few months on a United States military base in Texas. The family shares tea and their deep thanks with Nguyen, Ali, and Tan Tan, volunteers with the group Viets for Afghans. When Nguyen saw this harrowing imagery of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years of war, it triggered her own memories of her family's escape from Vietnam as boat people, a journey that took the lives of 4 family members, including her mother and 2 siblings.
How did that experience at 10 years old shape who you are now?
I would say that it made me realize that how someone's life can just turn upside down really, really quickly. I have a lot of empathy for one's life situation when it can change that fast.
Flashing back to her struggles and the kindness of strangers who helped her resettle in the United States nearly 40 years ago, Nguyen didn't hesitate.
Lentils? I just picked up my phone and I texted my 4 other friends and just tell them that I think we need to do something.
So you just picked up the phone and said, who's in?
Exactly. And so far we have sponsored 2 of those families here to Seattle, and we're planning to do more.
Viets for Afghans is about 15 volunteers strong. They use the Sponsor Circles program, a community initiative requiring at least 5 adults to agree to assist with housing, schooling, and jobs for refugees.
We never thought of like kind of Vietnamese family or immigrants in general being in positions where they can help other immigrants.
Ali is one of Sahib's sponsors. She met the family picking them up at the airport, had furniture, even beds and toys for the kids donated.
You see the evacuation from Afghanistan, and just as a human, you can't help but want to help.
He's saying he's really thankful.
I can relate. In 1980, my family and I ended up in Eugene, Oregon as refugees from Vietnam. Sponsors helped us transition to our new life. It is a kindness you can never repay. Kindness like when Sahib learned he and his family will live in this apartment, Tam Nguyen offering it rent-free.
Let me show you where your house is going to be.
Tam, also a refugee from Vietnam, arrived in Seattle in 1980. Today, he's a pharmacist, developer, restaurateur, and now a volunteer for Viets for Afghans.
This is my second chance, and my chance is to help another family. It's a privilege.
There are currently 18,000 Afghan refugees on military bases across the U.S. waiting to find permanent homes. Sahib says he worked as a special forces contractor, backed by the United States, and feels many more Afghans should be given refuge here.
There are a lot of people in Afghanistan that sacrifice so much for the United States government. They're being killed, so he's calling upon anybody that can help to get them evacuated.
Have your eggs right.
refugees helping refugees, paying their debt of kindness forward to a new generation of Americans.
All right, Vicki joins us now. Vicki, first off, really incredible job highlighting such an important program. And I know this story had to be so important to you, as we saw there, because it's personal. As a son of refugees, I know what it's like to get the kindness of strangers and to hear about those stories from my parents and my grandparents. Was this personally tough to tell for you because you could sort of be so connected to it?
Yeah, Tom, you put it beautifully. I mean, I think if you ask any Vietnamese American in this country who's a refugee, when they saw what was happening in Afghanistan in August, those images were strikingly familiar. It hit me in a very different way. And I think part of what is so special about our jobs as journalists is we get this opportunity to tell stories that would otherwise go unnoticed, to shine a spotlight on what's happening. And I think this story in particular really reminded us of our shared humanity. So we just thought it was a privilege to be able to do this. And kudos to Jamie and David, who did such a great job finding Viets for Afghans and working with them to get the right families who were willing to go on camera. This is a deeply personal experience, coming to a new country, starting again. And we really credit Sahib and his family for allowing us to share this experience with them.
And such a generous way to pay it forward. Can you explain to our viewers how the Sponsor Circles works, how this program works, and how they can help if they want to?
Yeah, this is so interesting. So you can just go to the Sponsor Circles website, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to do to sort of create a blueprint for welcoming a refugee family into your community. It starts with 5 willing adults who say, yeah, we're going to go ahead, we're going to do this. We're going to make sure we commit at least 3 months to helping these folks find jobs, find public resources, and find schooling. And there is a financial component, too. You're committing to raising $2,275 per refugee. This is just to help people with their basic needs to get on their feet once they come here. And so that's why every single donation is so, so vital. And as you can see, the commitment is for 3 months. But I think the bonds that you just saw forming, those are going to last a lifetime.
Yeah, and you truly change people's life, and sometimes immediately. Vicki, thank you so much for sharing that story. We really do appreciate it. And we thank you for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Have a great night. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.